saw the waves coming in sets and breaking over the rocks right across the car park and then submerging the road. And there were two parked vehicles. One eventually got driven away, but the other one appeared to get lifted and taken across to the other side of the road and landed into someone's garden. We saw people jump on rocks as water was coming across, and lifting their dogs so that their dogs and they didn't get swept away. Trees coming in, people nearly getting swept off their feet. People getting swept off their feet. Yeah, we saw people running. People couldn't see it, so they were out for their walk, but they couldn't see the danger, and there was no way of alerting them. So we could see the waves come in, but we couldn't alert them. So yeah, it was very worrying.
Huge waves have been hitting Wellington's south coast today, forcing people to leave their homes and injuring one person who got dragged out to sea. A big southerly swell sent waves about 6 metres high onto the road, hitting Owhero Bay through to Breaker Bay particularly hard. Jonathan Mitchell reports.
About half a dozen homes were evacuated late this morning as the waves crashed across the road and into garages and houses. One person was caught by the waves and injured. Wellington Free Ambulance say they were taken to hospital in a moderate condition. Taylor Philpott filmed the waves crashing into our house in Owhero Bay. She was luckily on the third story.
So it was coming right up at our house. A bit of water went through our garage, but the worst of it is really at the top of the street. The waves sort of just carried on right up the bay and broke over the shore and then took out some windows at the front of the street and the fencing on the bridge.
She says there was a lot of debris.
A lot of driftwood. There's a shipping container that sort of moved out onto the middle of the road. People have moved their cars now, which is good. And the fencing on the retaining wall is fallen down at the end.
Another resident, Jemima Bullock, lives between Island Bay and Owhero Bay. She says the waves sounded dramatic and harsh from early this morning, and she says it caught curious onlookers and dog walkers by surprise.
There were quite a few people watching on the car park outside the Beach House Cafe, and then we saw a big wave come up and, sort of drench a few people, and that's when it started to get dangerous.
She told others to stay away.
We saw a few dog walkers get into trouble, so we yelled if they needed some help, but most of them just got wet, really, and cleared the way. Yeah, and then at that point, I actually put 2 messages on local Facebook pages just saying, please don't come down, it's not that safe.
Met Service forecaster Andy Best says the waves have now peaked.
High tide was just before midday, so the tide is now going down and the actual forecast for the maximum wave is receding because those swells are now moving away to the northeast.
The police say they and the council are clearing the debris, cleaning roads and assessing the damage. Locals are being advised to stay home and avoid the foreshore. For Checkpoint, call Jonathan Mitchell, Tēnā.
6 new confirmed cases and 14 probable cases. There are no further deaths to report. We now have 728 reported cases of people who have recovered from. That's an increase of 100 on yesterday. And the new combined total of confirmed and probable cases in New Zealand, Aotearoa, is 1,386. Today there are 13 people in hospital, and this includes 3 in ICU, 1 each in Middlemore, Dunedin and North Shore hospitals. 2 of these folk in North Shore and Dunedin are in a critical condition. Yesterday there were 2,100 COVID-19 tests processed, with a rolling 7-day average now of 2,761, and the total number of tests completed is 66,499. I spoke last evening with District Health Board CEOs about the message I had conveyed to them around the need for us to increase testing following the Easter break. They're all very aware of this and are actively working with their teams to increase testing, including the use of mobile testing in some places to reach specific communities and groups. There are now 16 significant COVID-19 clusters. That's 1 more than yesterday. The new cluster is in Auckland and again is connected to an aged residential care facility. A reminder that a significant cluster is where there are 10 or more cases of COVID-19 that are connected. We'll provide more details on that and other clusters on our website. I just also want to point out, when you see our update on clusters, you will notice there has been an increase in the number of cases associated with clusters, actually a higher number than the total number of new cases today. And this is because cases that were previously identified as not knowing what the origin was have now been associated with those clusters, and therefore that is reducing the number of cases for which we don't know where they have come from, and this is good. Also, just the 15th cluster we talked about yesterday, which is also linked to an aged residential care facility. That was named yesterday by that facility itself, St Margaret Rest Home in Te Atatū in Auckland. That facility is working very closely with the DHB to contain the spread, as our other aged residential care facilities do. It's not an outbreak that is confined to that facility. It has some people inside the facility and some in the community. I want to briefly update some further analysis I commissioned around healthcare workers who have been infected with COVID-19. We will update the figures on our website today, and the total number is 115, which is 8% of total confirmed and probable cases. What I can say from that analysis is that there are only a small number, less than 5, where we can confirm that the cause of the infection was that the worker was infected by the patient they were caring for. So, for example, 22% of the healthcare worker cases because of overseas travel. They had in fact been overseas recently. Furthermore, from yesterday's total, which was 107, I wanted to know how many had been infected outside the workplace, and that was because they might have travelled overseas or they were part of a community-based cluster. And the answer to that was 56. So over half of those healthcare workers have actually been infected because of travel or are a close contact of a case outside the workplace or part of a cluster outside of the workplace. I wanted to know how many had been infected in the course of their work, and the total there was 46. And 39 of those are in aged residential care facilities and are part of the extant clusters we have there. In just 5 instances, it was not immediately clear and hasn't been worked out where the infection has come from. I think what all this means is, pleasingly, there is only a relatively small number of cases involving healthcare workers that are due to transmission from a patient or a resident, in the case of ARC, to the worker. And in the majority of those transmissions or clusters inside healthcare settings, more staff have been infected than patients. So I'm requesting ongoing reporting and breakdowns of this data, and I think what it does show overall that there's been a huge amount of work across the system to ensure staff are protected. That includes access to and appropriate use of PPE and very good infection prevention control, and I want to commend the efforts of all those involved. That's all I have. Over to you, there, Prime Minister.
Thank you, Dr. Bloomfield. Today, I can confirm that myself, government ministers and public service chief executives will take a 20% pay cut for the next 6 months, as we acknowledge New Zealanders who are reliant on wage subsidies, taking pay cuts and losing their jobs as a result of COVID-19's global pandemic. We feel acutely the struggle that many New Zealanders are facing, and so too do the people that I work with on a daily basis. And while it in itself won't shift the government's overall fiscal position, it is about leadership. And I acknowledge my colleagues, both in the executive, but also the colleagues we work with in the public service for the decision that was taken today. But it also stands alongside many actions taken by many people, private sector, citizens, to tackle the health and economic challenges of COVID-19. Including the more than $23 billion economic package, including the wage subsidy, which has paid out over $9 billion to 1.5 million New Zealanders, which MSD have worked tirelessly to make sure was reaching the people who needed it the most. Neighbours looking out for one another, rent freezers and landlords who are supporting tenants, things like the winter energy payment and benefits that are helping those who are on restricted incomes to keep warmer and well, New Zealanders who are staying home to save lives, the student army delivering groceries to over 65s, and Ministry of Health officials in charge of mandatory quarantine, for which I've received a message about their professionalism and exceptional work. So many examples of people showing what others mean to them in doing their bit in our united fight to stamp out COVID-19 and showing a little bit of kindness along the way. If there were ever a time to close the gap between groups of people across New Zealand in different positions, it is now. Of course, many people in our public sector are our frontline essential workers, nurses, police, healthcare professionals. We are not suggesting pay cuts here, and nor would New Zealanders find that appropriate. Rather, I am responsible for the executive branch, myself and ministers. This is where we can take action, and that is why we have.
This is COVID-19 Pacific Update for Wednesday, the 15th of April. There are now 244 confirmed cases and 7 deaths in 7 locations across the Pacific. Guam is at 135 cases and 5 deaths. The Northern Marianas has gone up to 13 with 2 deaths, and French Polynesia is at 55. New Caledonia is steady at 18 cases, Fiji has 16, Rapa Nui 5 and Papua New Guinea still at 2. Guam has another positive case, taking the number to 135. This doesn't include the 585 sailors who've tested positive from the USS Theodore Roosevelt, which is in port. One sailor has died after he was found unresponsive while in isolation in his hotel room on the island. More than 4,000 crew have been brought ashore and have been moved into housing at the naval base and empty hotels. One sailor caught leaving his hotel room whilst in quarantine, although not the hotel premises, has been taken back to the naval base for discipline. Tents are being put up near the naval hospital to increase the number of beds by 20, and ICU will be increased by 12 beds. Another 2 cases have tested positive for COVID-19 in the neighbouring Northern Marianas. This comes as the island have acquired 20,000 testing kits from South Korea. Another 40,000 are expected to arrive later this week. A special charter flight brought in the kits, along with a clinical psychopathologist to make sure that they're working correctly. Fiji continues to grapple with individuals breaking a strict national curfew, and Prime Minister Vorenke Bainimarama says civil servants who breach that or any other regulations should be dismissed. Mobile health teams are planning to scan 150,000 people in Suva with thermal scanners. These are not tests for COVID-19, just assessments. The Prime Minister says if not enough people are scanned, the government will extend the capital's lockdown, which is due to be lifted this Friday. In the Solomon Islands, the people of Rennell want the government to suspend logging and mining. This is because bulk carrier vessels keep coming in and out of the area with mineral shipments. 3 mining firms operate in West Rennell, and the locals believe it's a vulnerable hotspot for COVID-19. In New Caledonia, a cruise ship has been allowed to dock off the capital, Noumea. All the passengers had got off in New Zealand over a month ago before the lockdown there. The 92 crew who have remained on board have now done 2 weeks quarantine, which adheres to New Caledonia's strict regulations. There's been no confirmed cases on the island nation for a week. Well, our next COVID-19 Pacific update will be tomorrow, Thursday the 16th of April. Stay safe.
So while it looks like our strategy of going hard, going early may be paying off, the international response to COVID-19 hasn't been nearly so successful. Former Prime Minister and Administrator of the UN's Development Programme, Helen Clark, says the reaction has been somewhat flat-footed and that the UN Security Council's failed to step up. Well, Helen Clark joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning.
So what, in your opinion, then, has been the worst failings of our world's leaders and organisations?
In a sense, we've been in a perfect storm. This is a time when the American system, which has traditionally been one of the most supportive of the UN, has not been supportive of multilateralism in general. You also have a year when Mr. Trump is the president of the G7 and Saudi Arabia has the presidency of the G20. So that's a recipe for not much collective action globally. If you compare this pandemic with Ebola in 2014, President Obama got it. He said this is a pandemic. He saw the World Health Organization declaration that it was a public health emergency of global concern. He drove a resolution up and through the UN Security Council saying that this is a threat to global peace and security. Now, compare Ebola, which was largely confined to 3 small West African countries, with this. Your news just said we're heading for the 2 million cases, but it's moved beyond being a health crisis to being a full-blown economic crisis with serious social implications. That's why the Security Council should, weeks ago, have moved to resolve that this is a threat to peace and security, has not done so. And that's a terrific failure.
So do you think this is a matter of geopolitics?
Totally geopolitics. And yet with something like health, where each of us feels personally threatened, there's no vaccine. We're seeing in our own country the death toll starting to mount among younger people. I'm looking at the news out of the United Kingdom. I nearly fell off my chair last night when BBC led with news something like that COVID-19 is thought to be in 2,000 rest homes. Of course, there are many younger people who get it. Some feel virtually nothing, it passes. But for the older and vulnerable in our society, this is crushing. As I say, it's then moved beyond that to being what looks like being a very, very severe global recession, if not depression. And the IMF this morning is being reported as saying that global growth will dip 3%. And for the sub-Saharan African countries, for example, if they're not growing and the population's growing, then you have far more hungry mouths to feed. And now people are starting to worry about food security and a complete breakdown of societal order as the tensions mount in those conditions.
So how problematic is this virus for the developing nations?
Oh, incredibly problematic. Sub-Saharan Africa, we're told, faces a recession for the first time in 25 years. You know, even through the worst of the global financial crisis, somehow Africa, with its young demographics, held up. But some of the reports I'm saying say that this could see a surge in poverty in the world, extreme poverty, that's under the $1.91 a day, by up to 600 million people. So forget about the Sustainable Development Goal targets of eliminating extreme poverty. This is extremely serious.
We've got to run, but I'm going to ask you one more question. How do you feel the New Zealand government has handled this?
I think it's handled it very well, looking at international comparisons. And that's because relatively early, New Zealand government moved from trying to suppress it to saying we have to eliminate it because we can't live with it. Not all countries have actually reached that realisation. You can't live with it in the absence of a vaccine.
E te marae kura ngā mihi ki a koe. Thank you so much for your time this morning. We really do appreciate it. Helen Clark, former Prime Minister. Thank you.
Defence Force has taken over 2 Tasmanian hospitals forced into lockdown by the coronavirus outbreak. State Police have now launched an investigation into contentious reports medical staff have become infected at an illegal dinner party. More than 1/3 of Tasmania's 150 cases are now linked to the deadly Northwest outbreak.
The coronavirus outbreak here at the Northwest Regional Hospital and Northwest Private in Burnie has effectively wiped out the community hospital workforce. Around 5,000 health workers and their close contacts have been quarantined for 2 weeks, part of an unprecedented logistical operation across the coast. Patients discharged in recent weeks also quarantined.
Our aim there is to put a ring fence around the highest risk group of having infection.
Australian Defence Force medics touching down, heading straight from the Hercules to the front line.
We know that these are healthcare professionals that are used to being deployed into a range of circumstances. They will have the right infection control measures to protect themselves and also to ensure that we don't have further infection outbreaks in that site.
Patients are now being cared for at the Mersey, while expectant mums are being put up at Launceston's Hotel Charles. Similar measures in place for oncology patients,
so that they're able to access the services that they need during a very challenging time for them.
Burney's mayor says the whole operation has come as quite a shock.
They were expecting something. They weren't expecting this. The fact that there's 5,000 people potentially quarantined is a significant number of people when the population's 100,000 overall.
We've shut hundreds more businesses and we have put thousands of more people out of work. Now, this is a particularly serious outbreak. We want to get on top of it and we want to squash it.
France has recorded more than 15,000 coronavirus-related deaths, becoming the fourth country to go beyond that threshold after Italy, Spain and the United States. The rate of increase in fatalities has also risen again after steadying in previous days. But the number of people in intensive care has fallen by almost 100 in 24 hours, suggesting the national lockdown, extended until May 11, is helping to contain the disease. Italy has recorded a slight increase on the daily number of deaths, following a 2-day streak of its lowest recorded fatalities in 3 weeks. Deaths have risen by 602, up just 36 from the day before, bringing the country's total to more than 21,000. Italy will begin to very slowly ease restrictions as Europe's worst-hit country works to rebuild its economy.
Europe has always been a few weeks ahead of us in this global fight against COVID-19. Their cases surged before ours, and now some nations in the EU bloc are taking baby steps to get back to work. Maggie Ruley has this report.
You remember the images, healthcare workers struggling to keep the sick alive, the ICUs overflowing. Spain was hit harder than most nations, and for the first time in weeks since COVID-19 claimed over 18,000 lives, tonight, some relief. That nation's allowing some non-essential workers back on the job. Officials there trying to revive an economy on life support, as they, like much of the world, are desperate to get back to normal. While some are eager to get a semblance of their old lives back.
I think that they did this at the right time. People are keeping the safe distance, and I think it is very good.
For others, it's a sense of unease.
The situation is a bit strange because you still see a few people on the streets. We are all confined, and I feel a bit strange.
In Madrid, those who venture out are handed face masks, courtesy of the government. A necessary precaution when the invisible enemy can strike again at any moment. In Barcelona, people are still on alert.
I've been a month in quarantine now. Everyone is taking a lot of measurements. The streets are still very empty, so you're able to take your distance from everyone. And I think it's a matter of taking the right precautions yourself.
Some of the businesses allowed to resume include those working in construction and manufacturing. Others working in shops and bars and public spaces must wait almost 2 more weeks while officials closely monitor the infection rate. For Austria, the back-to-work order is methodical. Small mom-and-pop shops are being permitted to reopen, while restaurants and larger stores have to hold out until May. We saw streets slowly starting to fill again as China loosened lockdown restrictions 2 weeks ago. And while those who lived in the original epicenter of the outbreak in Wuhan were permitted to leave their homes, the fear of the unknown remained.
So it looks like things are fairly normal. It's kind of weird leaving the neighborhood. There's still like all these guards set up and stuff, and you have to scan a QR code to get out. I think they just kind of track you. I think we're just gonna play it cautious. Just go chill out at home. Maybe not leave the neighborhood for a while.
One thing is certain among those who have lived through this outbreak: no one wants a resurgence. But now that some European countries are starting to lift lockdowns, the inconsistencies within the EU bloc may be a new cause for concern. France and the UK just extended their restrictions until next month.
Everywhere in mainland France and in the overseas territories, the system is under strain and the epidemic is not yet under control.
Heads of state will have to reconcile how to deal with a plunging economy, perhaps the worst since the Great Depression, while families and communities grieve loved ones and an uncertain future.
And Maggie Ruley joins us now from London. And Maggie, while Spain and Austria attempt to reopen, Britain is still really in the thick of things like we are here in the U.S.
Yeah, exactly, Lindsay. Unfortunately, we are still seeing some high numbers that are very scary to be living through. More than 700 deaths again today in the UK. We saw more deaths, more hospitalizations over yesterday. And that's why, unlike some of our neighbors here in the UK, we're extending this lockdown. We're expected to extend it for weeks, although the exact length of that extension is still somewhat unknown. We're not alone, though. France is also extending their lockdown, which, Lindsay, leads to so many questions about what's going to happen here in Europe. When you have some countries, like you mentioned, Austria, Spain, Italy, starting to tentatively loosen up some of these lockdowns. Then you have the UK and France getting stricter and tightening up. It begs the question, what's the future going to look like? Is there going to be a new normal with borders open and trade freely and supply chains operating? Or is this the new normal that we're going to have to get used to? So even as some countries are opening up, there's still so many questions, Lindsay.
And Maggie, as you know, today the IMF released a dire warning saying the global economy could be plunging into its worst period since the 1930s, talking, of course, about when the Great Depression happened. How is the European bloc handling the crushing job losses?
Well, Lindsay, this whole thing started off as a medical crisis, but now it's quickly becoming an economical crisis as well. And here in the EU, we're seeing this firsthand. We know that millions are potentially going to be out of work, and the governments are trying to step up. We're seeing an unprecedented stimulus package here in the EU with more than 1 million companies across the continent that have signed on, saying they're going to try to avoid having to lay off their workers. But there was just still so much unknown. And just today, the UK came out telling people here, warning us to prepare for some tough times ahead financially, and even Lindsay, telling people that they're not going to be able to support every household, every business. So these kind of warnings are stark. They are hard to hear. But unfortunately, we know we're not alone. Nearly every country in the world is going to be dealing with this kind of economic crisis, Lindsay.
Maggie Ruley, thanks for reporting in again for us tonight.
The enemy is a virus that swept the globe, indiscriminately killing tens of thousands of people. Our scientists are our only hope. SARS coronavirus 2. The virus which causes the disease Covid-19.
A common cold virus, but it has, if you like, a sting in the tail, which is this ability to cause pneumonia.
It's believed to have first transferred from a bat to a human at this so-called wet market in Wuhan in China. Do you believe you have a cure for COVID-19?
That's what we believe.
Staff have been working 24/7 since we obtained a sample of this virus.
Of course, Australians aren't the only ones in this race for a cure. These are extraordinarily short timeframes. Typically, vaccine trials take around 18 months, and getting a vaccine from the lab to the shelves, 5 to 7 years. Basic hygiene is currently our best weapon.
It's like back to the times of the Spanish flu, 100 years ago, where that killed, 50 million people.
China has a biological weapons program. The US State Department a number of years ago said as much. And it's clear that they have the scientific capability to be able to do this at an extremely advanced way.
We're very likely to see another pandemic in the not too distant future, and these global pandemics will continue to occur more frequently than they have in the past. The live animal trade in China is another unsustainable and dangerous activity that will result in more pandemics in the future if it's not properly.
I'm sure you've heard of the South China Sea. It's a strategic waterway surrounded by 6 nations. Strategic because 1/3 of the world's shipping traffic passes through it. It has lucrative fisheries which are critical for the food security of the entire Southeast Asian region. So here's the deal. China is waging a silent war here. China is aggressively trying to assert its supremacy and dominance in the South China Sea. It is trying to browbeat its virus-hit neighbors into submission. This report tells you more about China's game plan.
The 3rd of April 2020. Coronavirus cases had crossed the 1 million mark globally. The world's attention was focused on containing the cases. It still is. But for Beijing, business continued as usual in the South China Sea. A Chinese surveillance ship hit and sunk a Vietnamese fishing boat in the disputed waters. 8 people on board the sinking vessel and 2 other Vietnamese boats were captured and detained. It's been more than a week, and Beijing has steadily increased its presence and frequency of harassment. It is consolidating and strengthening its position in the South China Sea. Why? Because besides China, there are 5 other claimants of territories in this resource-rich waterway. The state of Taiwan, Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, and Brunei. Together, these nations have over 11,000 cases of the coronavirus. The outbreak in these countries has stalled most defense activities. But the outbreak in mainland China has apparently been contained. The coronavirus is a foreign crisis now, and Beijing is reminding the smaller neighbors of its supremacy. 130 Chinese vessels have been spotted near the Philippines-occupied Pag-asa Island since January. 2 new research stations have been launched on China's large man-made islands, Fiery Cross and Subi Reef. These facilities are apparently conducting field navigation and scientific research in the Spratlys, a disputed archipelago. Since March, Chinese fighter jets have been conducting unprecedented air drills off the coast of Taiwan. This was followed by the deployment of an aircraft carrier, Liaoning, that was intercepted by Japan's military. And now with the sinking of a Vietnamese boat, the Dragon's strategic game plan is getting clearer. Beijing is using the pandemic to wage a silent war for lasting domination of this waterway. A war that may soon engulf more waterways and more countries if it remains unchecked and unreported. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
The inability of the WHO to obtain virus samples to this date has deprived the scientific community of essential data. New data that emerges across the world on a daily basis points to the unreliability of the initial reports, and the world received all sorts of false information about transmission and mortality. The silence of the WHO on the disappearance of scientific researchers and doctors, and on new restrictions on the sharing of research into the origins of COVID-19 in the country of origin is deeply concerning, especially when we put up by far the largest amount of money. Not even close. Had the WHO done its job to get medical experts into China to objectively assess the situation on the ground and to call out China's lack of transparency, the outbreak could have been contained at its source with very little death, and certainly very little death by comparison. This would have saved thousands of lives and avoided worldwide economic damage. Instead, the WHO willingly took China's assurances to face value, and they took it just at face value, and defended the actions of the Chinese government, even praising China for its so-called transparency. I don't think so. The WHO pushed China's misinformation about the virus, saying it was not communicable and there was no need for travel bans. They told us when we put on our travel ban, a very strong travel ban, there was no need to do it, don't do it. They actually fought us. The WHO's reliance on China's disclosures likely caused a 20-fold increase in cases worldwide, and it may be much more than that. The WHO has not addressed a single one of these concerns, nor provided a serious explanation.
US President Donald Trump, as I mentioned earlier, has followed through on his threat to freeze funding to the World Health Organization. He says the WHO has failed the US and the world by mishandling the coronavirus pandemic. The US is the WHO's largest donor, giving it more than $400 million a year, 10 times more than China. But no more for now.
Today, I'm instructing my administration to halt funding of the World Health Organization while a review is conducted to assess the World Health Organization's role in severely mismanaging and covering up the spread of the coronavirus. Everybody knows what's going on there.
Good on him. I'm hardly going to disagree with the US President when I've been highlighting the WHO's unforgivable behaviour for a couple of months or more on this program. Here's a snippet from early March. When Australia was early out of the blocks to ban travel directly from China, there were two entities quick to criticise. One was the World Health Organization at the UN, which had a swipe saying it was unnecessary and would cause fear and stigma. And more predictably, perhaps, the Chinese communist regime objected to the bans, citing the World Health Organization statements and suggesting Australia was giving in to unfounded fears. Yes, as I and others have highlighted, this organisation has behaved disgracefully. The WHO has opposed travel bans, been slow to declare the pandemic, and generally bent over backwards to support and praise Beijing rather than inform, alert and protect the world. That's what Donald Trump means when he says everyone knows what's going on here. It's the WHO kowtowing to China rather than protecting global health.
The decision of other major countries to keep travel open was one of the great tragedies and missed opportunities from the early days. The WHO's attack on travel restrictions put political correctness above life-saving measures.
We'll never know how much difference all of this would have or could have made. And of course, Trump is looking for a distraction from his own early mishandling of the virus, looking for someone else to blame. But there's no doubt the WHO has failed, and Trump's unambiguous condemnation shows global leadership. He'll draw a lot of fire, but he's right. Now, back in Australia, the government says we'll stick with the WHO. Our contributions are measured in the tens of millions of dollars. But the Treasurer says we reserve the right to criticise the organisation, particularly over its failure to condemn Chinese wet markets.
It's unbelievable. It's extraordinary that the World Health Organization sees it fit for these wet markets to continue in China. They shouldn't. I mean, they've been the source of outbreaks that have killed people around the world.
Fair enough. These markets where all kinds of wildlife is slaughtered in front of customers, mixed up with all kinds of other animals and meats, are blamed for many viruses, the place where they cross from animals to humans. So for all kinds of reasons, most people would support closing these markets down. They're cruel, ugly and dangerous. And already it seems the WHO is looking to change its stance on these. But regardless of that, we will get outbreaks of diseases and new mutations of viruses here and there forever and a day. So the critical factor is how we respond when this occurs, how organisations like the WHO react, and how countries like China share the information, tell us about outbreaks, instead of arresting, silencing and suppressing any medicos or officials trying to alert people. That's the real problem here, and it's been brilliantly highlighted by Tim Blair today in the Daily Telegraph. He took an article that was submitted by the Chinese consulate and applied some of the editing, redacting and censorship techniques that Beijing's communist regime might use itself. So, after Blair's censorship, it reads like this: China should be held responsible for the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. These claims are convincing. Is China to blame for the original sin, the outbreak? The answer is known. Wuhan, Hubei province, that's where the virus originated. The common enemy of mankind is World Health Organization. China, take the blame. And so on it goes. Just brilliant work by Tim Blair. He'll join me later in the show. And no, he's not expecting to holiday in China anytime soon.
Today I'm instructing my administration to halt funding of the World Health Organization while a review is conducted to assess the World Health Organization's role in severely mismanaging and covering up the spread of the coronavirus.
the span of 2,000 years, we have been given a collection of 66 books written by 40 people in various cultures, time periods, and languages. Today we call this collection the Holy Bible. Upon investigation, we find that these 66 books combine to form a message to humanity from a being outside of space and time by writing history before it happens. The Bible predicted the advent of the New Age movement and the New World Order thousands of years ago. It also tells us of a man who will rule this world empire and what his true intentions will be. All of this has been in the works for thousands of years, and it all hinges on Satan's ability to deceive mankind. The Apostle Paul in the 1st century AD wrote several letters to early churches, which are now called the epistles. The far application of these letters are a clear warning for us today. It is a warning of impending deception that will influence the whole world. Paul warns us of this deception in Ephesians 5, where he states, "Let no one deceive you with empty words." Then in his first letter to the Corinthians, he again tells us, "Do not deceive yourselves. If any one of you thinks he is wise by the standards of this age, he should become a fool so that he may become wise." In a letter to the Romans, he describes those who willingly live in lies when he writes, "Their throats are open graves, their tongues practice deceit, the poison of vipers is on their lips. For such people are not serving our Lord Christ, but their own appetites. By smooth talk and flattery, they deceive the minds of naive people." In a letter to Timothy, Paul clearly describes the world we see today when he writes, "The Spirit clearly says that in later times some will abandon the faith and follow deceiving spirits in things taught by demons." In the second letter to the Thessalonians, Paul describes the New World Order and the Antichrist when he wrote, "Don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day will not come until the rebellion occurs and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the man doomed to destruction. Don't you remember that when I was with you, I used to tell you these things, and now you know what is holding him back, so that he may be revealed at the proper time. For the secret power of lawlessness is already at work, but the one who now holds it back will continue to do so till he is taken out of the way. And then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord Jesus will overthrow with the breath of his mouth and destroy by the splendor of his coming. The coming of the lawless one will be in accordance with the work of Satan, displayed in all kinds of counterfeit miracles, signs, and wonders, and in every sort of evil that deceives those who are perishing. They are perishing because they refused to love the truth and so be saved. For this reason, God sends them a powerful delusion so that they will believe the lie, and so that all will be condemned who have not believed the truth but have delighted in wickedness." The Apostle John, while in prison on the island of Patmos, had a vision of the end times and the deceiving entities that will walk the earth, stating, "And the great dragon was cast out, the ancient serpent who is called Devil and Satan. He who deceives the whole habitable world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. He deceives my own people who dwell on the earth because of the signs he was granted to do in front of the beast, saying to those who dwell on the earth that they should make an image of the beast who had the sword wound and lived." Jesus Christ himself gave his discourse of the end times when he stated clear warnings of the signs of the end. "Watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, claiming I am the Christ, and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nations will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of the birth pains. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other, and many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold, for then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive, but for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. At that time, if anyone says to you, 'Look, here is the Christ,' or 'There he is,' do not believe it, for false Christs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and miracles to deceive even the elect, if that were possible. See, I have told you ahead of time." Jesus Christ died for the sins of all mankind. That means he died for the New Agers, the Freemasons, those in the Illuminati, the world elite, the Luciferians, the Satanists, and even me and you. God himself taking on humanity has given mankind a free gift of salvation and of true spiritual freedom. Now we all have a choice. We can live in darkness, allowing evil to enter our lives and unwillingly support the work of Satan and his fallen angels. Or we can let Jesus into our hearts and be spiritually saved forever. There are no prerequisites, rituals, or tests for accepting this gift of salvation. All one needs to do is ask honestly for Jesus to come into their heart. Remember these truths. God loves you, God cares about you, God wants nothing more than to know you personally and save you. Sin separates people from each other and God. Jesus died for your sins and rose again. You can receive Jesus now and know God's love right at this very moment. I pray for you all and hope the truth will indeed set you free. Thanks for your time. I think in conclusion I'd like to appeal to those people that have been researching this for any length of time, specifically long periods of time, maybe even years. To you, I don't think this is going to require a lot of convincing. I think that subconsciously you know that a lot of what was said here is true. I think that you have seen over the years a lot of conclusions about what the New World Order is and what their motives are, and I know that you know that it doesn't really explain all the loose ends and tie them all up. I think that you know, after kicking down so many doors in New World Order research and seeing those that truly expose the New World Order, this theme, that it is in fact theistic Satanism behind those doors. I know that you've seen that. You've seen that they are high-level occultists that really run this show and that are in the shadows. And that even those front men at the very tops are only front men, and that the real movers and shakers are those that hold very dedicated beliefs about the worship of Satan. So we even have this idea that somehow doesn't apply. We have a phrase that we'll say, which is, it doesn't matter what you believe, the fact is that they believe it, which sort of means, yeah, sure, they're all occultists at the top, but it doesn't really matter. They're just sort of deluded. And I think that's a very dangerous position, because if you actually are saying there that it doesn't matter, it's not actually true, there isn't really a Satan and there isn't really a power that they're serving, then we should just, again, think that this scenario has something to do with whatever we make it out to be. It certainly can't be about a cosmic war of good and evil, because we've already decided that that can't be true. Yet at the same time, we're pointing out that these people are knowingly worshiping Satan, which is something that the Bible has said has gone on from the very beginning. The kings and queens of all the old systems were always sacrificing their children to various gods and Moloch and these types of things. And they are still doing it today and are gaining power from it. The problem with believing that is it makes too much sense that all of this energy with the New Age preachers and teachers and truth movement icons and gurus are doing mainly two things. One, they're promoting this idea of a New Age coming in which you're going to be God and you're going to be evolved and all the obvious stuff that's preparing you for the system of the Antichrist. And the other part of that is they're telling you that Jesus isn't good, you shouldn't pay attention to him, or at least they're trying to misdirect you, tell him he's just this other guy, he's not really who the Bible says he is, or they're trying to discredit the Bible. There's only two things that these guys are doing. They're telling you and preparing you for the new system that you're going to think is your utopia. And then they're telling you to not pay any attention to the man that the Bible said would crush the one that these people at the top are worshiping. Does anybody see a problem with that? That we have been told what to think about the Bible and Jesus Christ by Satanists. The problem here is that what we have been told and what we've been prepared to believe is all what we would choose to believe. It's all very seductive. They're telling you that you can be as God. They're telling you that there is no real accountability for your actions, that anything that you want to do is good and normal and should be praised. These ideas are very difficult to resist. Truth really is irrelevant at that point, because we will fight to defend those ideas, regardless of if they are true or not. And that's why there's so many conflicting quote-unquote truths in the New Age and in the truth movement. You know, that's why the first thing that you're taught in the truth movement is that truth is relative. oh, it doesn't matter, your truth is just as good as my truth, and we'll fight to defend this completely erroneous idea. I've got news for you. It doesn't matter what way the universe operates. The fact is that it does operate one particular way, cause and effect, in a closed system. We are dealing with absolute truth. Maybe yours, maybe mine, but it is absolute, and it is one. We should be concerned about looking for the truth. And I suggest to all you researchers out there that you already have enough evidence to know that Jesus Christ is who he says that he is. You owe it to yourself to figure out more about him the way the Bible says that he is. Not the way that the New World Order says that he is, but the way the Bible says that he is. The Bible has been continually discredited. You're told not to listen to it. You're told not to pay attention to it. They do everything under the sun to keep you from it. They always have. So why don't you just realize that and take the time and figure out who is Jesus according to the Bible?